All right, hello and welcome to chapter 6. This chapter is going to be about arrays, and it's actually split into two parts because it's a pretty long chapter and it's a pretty major topic for computer science. Our goal today is just to do the basics and arrays. So our goal there is to learn how to store data in arrays, and arrays are just another variable type. So think about like ints and doubles and strings and stuff. An array is a variable type, right? And actually, to be more specific, it's a variable that's going to store multiple values of the same type. Okay, so we are going to continue to use the int, double, and string, but now an array just says we have more than one of them. Like we have a whole set of numbers or a whole set of names. So you can think about like all your followers on Twitter. That'd be a set of strings, right? A set of names. You could think about how many points you score in each basketball game, right? So let's say you had a 20 game season, that's 20 different individual ints representing how many points you score in each game. So when you have multiple variables of the same type, that's where you're going to use an array. Okay, and specifically, they have to be of the same type. So, for example, I can't store like a string with a double. In fact, you can't even store a double with an int. It has to be only ints or only doubles when you're doing your array. Okay, so I have some other examples down here. 10 test scores, right? That might be 10 ints. Your friends, right? For Mr. Westpatal, that'd be a list of like 2 friends. Wouldn't be very long, but we could still use an array for the 2 different friends. And then, like we talked about, how many scores you score or how many points you score in basketball games. All right, and so I'm just gonna kind of, you don't have to code this with me. This is just more for me to explain to you a little bit about arrays. And so here's the idea: is in campus they keep track of all the test scores, right? So let's just say we had a test recently, and we wanted to do one score for all the 26 kids in this class, or however many kids there are. Right, I didn't even type them all out because that took me forever. So I just did 10. Okay, so I'm just gonna say I have 10 scores or whatever. And prior to arrays, we would have to make a single variable for every single score, right? And that would be a way to keep track of each kid's score on a test, but it's really cumbersome because you got all these different score variables. Okay, so since they are all ints, we can put them in an array and store the data that way. All right. So basically how it'll work is you're going to create it the same as shown here. I'm just going to type int, except the difference is anytime you do an array, you do this bracket thing, right? And that pretty much tells Java that I'm going to have multiple int values. This is going to be an array of ints. Okay, and then you give it a name the same as shown above here. So I'm just going to call this scores, right? Because it stores multiple scores. And then I'm going to set it equal to, and when you initialize it, you don't have a single value like we do up here. You're going to have a list of values essentially. So you're going to do a curly brace and then list your numbers in order with commas between them. Okay, and you can put in pretty much as many as you want. I'm just going to do specifically the example that's up there. 89, 81. We got little Billy there in class. He was playing on his cell phone, so he scored a 55. Otherwise, my students usually dominate, of course. So anyways, I think I got them all. I didn't miss any. But at any rate, these now represent the scores in a single variable. All right. And so, yeah, I'm going to show one other thing here. I loaded this code into what's called a visualizer to kind of let you see what's happening here. And so I made an array, just the same one we had before, but I also made a regular non-array int that keeps track of how many funny jokes I've told, which looks like it's 0. Fantastic. But anyways, I'm just going to hit forward on this thing here. And so you can see the 2 variables I created, and you can see what happens with the array. Hopefully you can see this up here, is you have the numbers, but then what you have on top of here is these are called the indexes or the position. And that's how you like reference the different values, right? So I'll type some code here in a second, but please know with an array, you end up having like the actual value. And then you also have like an index that represents the position in the array. As always, the first number is not actually the first position. It's called the 0 position. And the next one is 1, 2, 3, etc., etc. So this has 10 elements, but it actually has indexes 0 up to 9, which you can see right there. Okay, and another thing to kind of note here, a difference is, we'll talk about this later, but arrays end up being a reference type, so that's why they have this little pointer. So scores is basically pointing to this array in memory. It points to a location in memory versus num funny jokes is a primitive, and that's just a bucket that doesn't point, right? And that we'll talk more about like why that's significant, but that's also one thing to note here in our visualizer. That's kind of interesting. Okay, and in case that screen didn't show up very well for you there, this is just an example of another array of ints. This one has 4 elements, and they'd have the values are here, right? So this might be a good thing to jot down in notes, is that you have values or elements, and then these are called the indexes or positions. I added that to my screen there. We have indexes or positions are what the top little things are called, and then their elements or values are the actual numbers that are stored there in the array. And so I was actually out at my mailbox one day getting my mail, and I was looking at like the numbers on the mailbox, and I thought this is actually a good way to think of an array, right? Do you have a like a number, like the mailboxes were numbered with for each person or whatever, so they knew what number they had, and then that would be like the index or the location, and then inside of there you actually have data, you have mail, right? And so inside of our arrays we'll have like values or elements or whatever, we'll have actual data, and that data could be a string, an int, the double. You can make an array of pretty much anything that you want. So I thought this mailbox was a good way to think of it, or think of those little calendars you get around Christmas time where you like open them and there's little candy inside. You'd have a number on the outside, that would be the index, and then you'd have a value on the inside, that would be the piece of chocolate. All right, so I'm going to dive back into our code here a little bit. All right, now that we've talked a little bit more about arrays. And so we've created the array this way. All right, and I also want to do one other way to create an array. So I'm going to do int bracket, and I'm going to call this like, I don't know, maybe the ages of the students or something. So I'm going to give it a different name, and then I'm going to type new, and that's because it's a reference type, and then int, and maybe let's say 25 or something. Okay, so what'll actually happen here is this is like a second way to create an array. And the most common is this first one. This is by far the way I do it, is populate it with values. But what the second one does is just makes it blank. All right, so it just makes 25 spots, indexes 0 to 24, that has a bunch of zeros for the ages. Okay, so this is more like if you know later on you need to populate it. So maybe if I was doing like a basketball score one where I want to keep track of how many points you score per game, at the beginning of the year, we just make however many games there are, right? We'd make that many slots and then fill them in as each game gets played. Okay, so this is a way to just say, hey, I want 25 values, and then I'm going to fill them in later. So it's kind of initialized to 0. Little note here, all values initialized to 0. Okay, so the first one we gave specific values, this one just initializes it to 0. Please note that one of the downfalls to arrays is you can't change the size. So this one has size of 25, and then this array up here has a size of, I think, 10 or something like that. Yeah, 10 elements, and you can't change it later on, right? It's fixed. Whatever you initialize it to, it's got to stay that way throughout the rest of the code. In the second half of chapter 6, we'll learn about something called an array list, which is flexible and can dynamically change its size. So, all right, I'll spell this right. It's embarrassing that I don't know how to spell the word initially. Okay, that word has a lot of I's in it. I'm not gonna lie, makes it tricky. Okay, so anyways, after you create them, all right, so we create variables, but then we want to use them usually, like we want to print them out or change them. Okay, so like, let's say we feel bad for Billy here because he got a 55. So, I could just, in the past, I would just do like, I could go here and just do like score 6. I could just overwrite it with a new score. Maybe he retook the test and got 82 this time or something. Or we could add to it. I could do like score 6 plus 10 just for bonus points for me feeling bad for Billy. Okay, so the way that we do that with the array is you're going to use the name just like we did here, and then you're going to put in brackets the one you want to work on. So I'm going to do, let's see, scores, and then bracket, bracket, all right? And then I have to put in the position or the index of the one I want to do. So here's the 55. So if we count, it'd be at 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's in the 5th spot. So I can do scores 5, and I can overwrite it with something else. So maybe I'll just make it, let's make it 70 because we feel bad for Billy here or whatever. Okay, so that if I print it out here, so if I print out scores, position 5, initially it will be the 55. And then once I set it to 70, it'll go like that. So I'll print it out now. We can see, okay, so we can see how it changes. So you use it just kind of like you do up here, except you have to specify which int you want to change. Okay, because you can't just do like scores equals 70 because scores in an array and this is just an int. Okay, so you have to like specify which number I want to change. We wanted to change the 5th one. Okay, and you can do same thing you can do with a regular int. So like you can do a plus plus to an int. So if I do plus plus scores position 9, that will actually change this 92 to a 93. All right, because it just takes the int at position 9 and then treats it just like a regular int, right? Once you do this, this is essentially an int. You can add it, subtract it, add 1 to it, do everything you can with a regular int. It's the same thing, you just have to specify a position like. Okay, so I want to just see if things are making sense to you. So I have a couple system out prints, and I want to see if you can pause the video here and figure out what is printed out by these two print statements. All right, hopefully you had a chance to try it. Scores array, and we're going to get the int that's at position 1. So remember, we start at 0, so this is 0 and then 1. So this should print out 95. Okay, and then for ages, if you do this second one where you don't specify a value, just say how many positions, it's just going to all be 0. So ages position 3, that would be the 4th number over, but it would just be a 0 because it initializes them all to 0. All right, I'm gonna do 2 more for you that are gonna be kind of trickier. So I actually don't know if I just take that away and just print out scores itself, that's an array, right? When it's listed with the bracket bracket, that's actually an int because you're specifying one of the ints. But if I do this, that's the whole array. Okay, and then let's try doing ages of 25. Maybe like, no, I'm not gonna do that. Let's do scores of 10. Let's do that. And what do you think is going to be printed out by those two? Pause the video and give it a shot. Okay, so for the first one, I don't actually know. I think it might just print out all these numbers, which would be nice, but it also might print a position in memory because this is a pointer variable type. So oftentimes when your system will print it, I think the default is displays its location in memory, but we'll see here in a second. And scores 10 is actually going to print an error, right? And the reason is these indexes go from 0 to 9, so there is no 10th spot, right? So that's kind of tricky with the off by 1 error because it starts at 0, so that's kind of goofy. But if we run this, it looks like it does print out the memory location for scores, which is kind of a bummer. We'll have to use a loop here to print them out individually. And then we definitely get the array index out of bounds exception. And that just means that we're trying to access a position that does not exist. It goes beyond how many elements we have in our array. Okay, and so all of this is related to, I think we've talked about it before, where the arrays are going to be an object type. Okay, so they have the uppercase letter, they're more complex, they use the new keyword. Okay, and I don't think we've talked a ton about it, but they point to different spots in memory. Right, that arrays are reference type. So here's basically a summary of what we did today. I'm not going to have time to go through it, but you can pause the video here and just read over it. That is it. So that's our introduction to arrays. Thank you for watching and have a good day.